This episode is brought to you by State Farm. From your morning podcast to your afternoon playlist, State Farm knows you personalize your entire day, and that's why State Farm helps you personalize your insurance with the State Farm Personal Price Plan. It offers coverage options that help protect what you care about most at an affordable price just for you. Like a good neighbor, State Farm is there. Prices vary by state. Options selected by customer. Availability and eligibility may vary.
Business taxes. Was stressing about all the time and all the money you spent on your taxes.
This is my bill?
Now Business Taxes is a TurboTax small business expert who does your taxes for you and offers year-round advice at no additional cost, so you can keep more money in your business. Now this is taxes. Intuit TurboTax. Get an expert now on turbotax.com/business. Only available with TurboTax Live Full Service.
Thank you, everyone, for tuning in to this bonus episode of DNA Surprises. Today, I am joined by Venessa de la Cruz. She is a licensed clinical social worker and certified EMDR and brain spotting therapist. She is passionate about helping people learn how to heal from complex trauma as they are navigating multiple roles in their daily life. The majority of her practice focuses on attachment trauma, religious trauma, grief, and reclaiming motherhood expectations. Her approach is trauma-focused, using a combination of EMDR therapy, brain spotting, mindfulness, and other evidence-based practices. Venessa is going to be a facilitator at the DNA Surprise Retreat coming up in September. And during our time together, we will be discussing betrayal traumas and how that has influenced our current relationships. We'll also explore some of the parts of ourselves that feel hurt and discover ways to work with them to grieve and heal. Welcome, Venessa.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us. I'm so excited for the session at the retreat and thought that having a little chat beforehand would give people an idea of what to expect if they're thinking about attending the retreat or are just curious about this term betrayal trauma, which I honestly hadn't heard of until very recently. So thanks for joining us.
For sure. I'm happy to share more, for everyone who is thinking about this or who will be attending, right? This, like you said, it's not a common term, although I think we'll hear it more often being said. So I'm excited to talk about it because I think there's, some ideas about what it is, and it encompasses a lot of different things that I don't think people realize.
I know I kind of maybe stole your thunder with a very robust intro, but I would love to learn more. Can you share a little bit about yourself and how you got into this work?
Sure. So I've been a practicing therapist since 2008. Math is not a strong suit, so it's been that many years. I would say probably at the age of 13, I knew I wanted to be a psychologist. I just didn't really realize what the schooling for that looked like, right? But I knew I wanted to help people not feel alone in their pain. And that comes from my own experience. And so it was not a straight shot to that major in college. I definitely took a different turn just because of parent expectations and things like that. So I was an engineering student for a hot second, but quickly failed out of many of those classes. So I landed here, and here I am all of these years later. But that's really how it started, was this passion to help people not feel alone in their experiences. I graduated graduate school in 2007, worked as a case manager for about a year, and then worked as a therapist since then. And I've seen pretty much the lifespan, but my practice now focuses mostly on adults. So those young adults, like 18 all the way up, I have clients in their 60s and 70s. And so it's really focused on complex trauma. So it's a big term, but what my clients will walk in telling me that's going on is there's a lot of anxiety. There's a lot of depression symptoms. They are struggling in feeling connected into their life, plugged in. Right? They just kind of feel like they're going through the motions. They're exhausted. Many of them have medical diagnoses like chronic illnesses or autoimmune disorders that kind of correspond maybe with some of the other things they're experiencing. And so that's what I'm going to hear first, right? Is like, I can't get to bed. I'm so exhausted. Life is really difficult and challenging. Not a lot makes me happy or excited. And then as we kind of sit and chat, there's a whole story that unfolds about how we got here. So that's my practice. And I have a physical office here in the Valley in Gilbert. And I also do online. Yay, COVID, it helped me kind of figure out that space. And when I'm not doing therapy and running that business, I'm a mom. So I have 2 daughters that I am parenting. One just turned 13. So I'm entering those ever so fun teen years. Yes. They're exciting and challenging, but, and then I have she'll be 10 here just in a few weeks. So I've got 2 rising preteen teenage girls that I'm trying to get through some of their challenges and those experiences. I'm also married. So, pile on the labels and the things that we do. And then I'm a mom of 3 doodles who may or may not pop up on the screen here, depending on where they're napping. Preferences are during our time together. So yeah, that's a little bit about me.
Thank you for sharing. And the things that you were saying about your clients, the can't get out of bed, a lot of that depression, anxiety, I think is something that a lot of people in the DNA surprise community experience, especially in that initial aftermath. And a lot of that is the result of betrayal trauma. And like I mentioned at the top, this is kind of a relatively new term to me, but it's what your session is going to focus on, and I think is at the core of so many of the issues that people in the DNA surprise community face. So can you explain what is betrayal trauma?
I think, if people were to hear that phrase, I think their initial maybe idea about what that looked like would be, someone, a spouse or a partner, maybe being unfaithful in the relationship, right? And I think that's probably the biggest context people will kind of put together with betrayal trauma. But there really are multiple types of betrayal trauma, right? There is betrayal trauma that happens within a parent-child relationship. So there's a trust that's broken or violated, or boundaries that are violated in a relationship. You're going to see it with institutions. So maybe things like a church or the justice system for some families, right, who can experience a trauma there. And so you're going to see it on bigger institution type settings. You're definitely going to see it in that intimate personal relationship piece, right? Whether it's a partner or spouse, that could occur as well. And then you're going to see it in your other social types of relationships, whether it's peers or coworkers, right? So the root of the whole word is just this betrayal. And so whether it's, I told my best friend the secret and then she went and told this other person, right? And then it became this whole thing. Or whether it's something like what the community of DNA surprises realizes and uncovers through their journey, that maybe what they had thought wasn't. And so there is this initial like, oh my goodness, what does this mean? What does that mean about this relationship, right? What does it mean about all sorts of things? The trauma piece is really about how we take in that information and how we process that information. So in general terms, in my office, trauma is just anything our brains weren't ready or prepared to handle at the time. So you can think about that in terms of development level. Like if it happens to us at 5 versus 15, we're going to see a situation differently, right? But maybe you're an adult and you uncover, that the person who raised you is not in fact biologically related to you and you had no idea. This thing that happened as an adult, you might have an adult sort of level of understanding at this point, but what it's going to do is pull all of the stuff that we experience from childhood into question, right? And that becomes the challenging part of these experiences, is just how this information is stored in our bodies, how we're taking it in, what we remember, what we have to question, and just sort of that uneasiness of what does this mean about me in this relationship and in our family system, right? So there's a lot of complexity to betrayal trauma, but at its root, it has to really do with relationship. It's going to happen in a relationship of some sort, and it's going to be that violation that occurs in that relationship. We put our trust in someone, right? And then that trust was broken or violated in some sort of way.
That is such a good description. I was definitely thinking of it from that parent-child perspective or other kinds of relationships, but taking a step back and looking at it like systemically, medical providers, the justice system, that's a really good point and something that I hadn't considered before. Now, you kind of touched on the trauma element. And, you know, trauma's a very popular word now, right? It's definitely coming into the common vernacular.
Yes.
And I guess I was sort of wondering if you could talk about the difference between a betrayal. So there may be a time where somebody betrays you and maybe it's not traumatic. I mean, I don't know if that's the case, but can you describe what the difference might be between, you know, being betrayed and a betrayal trauma?
Sure. I sort of think of it, we're going to kind of like sidestep this a minute, but in terms of like what I see, right? So not all traumas will turn into PTSD symptoms, right? Post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms, but they can still be traumatic. And I think that can be similar here where betrayals can be painful and they can be hurtful. And I think a lot is going to have to do again with the age that we experience this traumatic piece, experience or event, the support system we have in place to kind of help us through that experience, those resources, right? A best friend may betray my trust, right? And I might be upset, and that might maybe even kind of hinder our relationship a little bit, but it might not stick with me. I might be able to move on. I may, you know, maybe just set boundaries in that relationship moving forward, and I can kind of keep going. When there's a trauma that occurs, this is going to be at a very deep level. And this goes back to just neurobiology. Like it affects our bodies because trauma is stored in our nervous systems. And so we're going to have somatic symptoms that come along with trauma. It might be a stomach ache when you think about it, or you might notice that when you think about the event, your muscles just get really tense, or that you get this lump in your throat. Maybe a headache starts to, you know, kind of come on. There's going to be some body reactivity to this experience. And that's not the only thing, but that's a big telltale sign that I will ask my clients. They will say, I don't know if this is trauma. And I'll say, what does your body tell you when you think about this experience? What do you notice in your body? Right. And if there's still something there, whatever it is, stomach ache, joint pain, then I'm going to kind of sort of go down this trauma piece of like, okay, this is stored in a, what we would say, maladaptive way in the brain. And we need to help release it so it's not those somatic symptoms that we're having to deal with, those triggers, right? So again, not all betrayals might become trauma, but they certainly can. And I think when we talk about relationship traumas, those are relationship betrayals. Those are more likely going to become traumatic, especially the closer we are in that relationship. So a parent-child versus a coworker, right? It can happen in the medical community. Like medical trauma is a situation that we see often, right? Doctors not listening or things like that, or having to have surgeries if you didn't need to, like all sorts of things can happen in that way too. That really can produce like post-traumatic stress types of symptoms. And so we're navigating in the trauma world, not just the experience, what came next in terms of, again, what supports maybe you had in place or didn't have in place to kind of help you, and what is kind of there somatically too, when you kind of revisit that information.
That's a good delineation there. Sometimes I think lately, maybe this is just my hot take, we tend to throw trauma onto like everything right now.
Oh, yeah.
And don't get me wrong, I definitely consider my DNA surprise to be a trauma. I do think I had some betrayal trauma going on the more that I learn about it. But it's kind of nice to hear, okay, well, not every betrayal is a trauma, and this is kind of how it affects us. Can you go a little bit deeper into some of the manifestations of a betrayal trauma and how that comes up? You mentioned like a stomach ache, a headache. What are other things that people maybe should look for in helping to determine if maybe they're dealing with some traumatic effects?
So the different ways that and this is not me, this is just what I've learned doing EMDR, but the different things that I kind of look for when we're talking trauma in my office is, what are the negative beliefs that we have that are related to this experience, right? And it's usually about the self versus the other person. There might be thoughts about the other person too, but it's truly something that we take in. And this also has to do with age and development too, right? Usually like, am I lovable or am I good enough, right? So there's different categories of these negative beliefs that we kind of will run through. Some of the big, I guess most common, I would say, negative beliefs that I see are that I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable, right? I don't deserve good things or to be loved. I can't keep myself safe. So those sorts of things we'll see. And those thoughts aren't maybe something that they would, a client would say like, oh, I think about that all the time. But you might see it in their behaviors or the way that they interact with somebody, right? So they may not speak up when they need to, or they may be quote unquote people pleasers, right? Because they just want to be okay in this dynamic. And so they do what they need to sort of keep that sort of copacetic relationship going. So we're looking for those negative beliefs, right? How we believe or what we believe about ourselves. Outside of the somatic, we're looking for the feelings attached. I always tell clients, like, you're not going to have emotion without having a physiological response. They go together, right? And so if I'm having a pit in my stomach, what emotion's going with that pit in my stomach feeling? Is it anxiety? Is it confusion? Is it hurt? We kind of want to look at the emotion behind it too. We're definitely going to start to see relationship trust issues maybe. So feeling maybe closed off from opening up. Vulnerability is really hard when we've had betrayal traumas in relationships, because the vulnerability in of itself leaves room for us to potentially be hurt. And so we just experience this thing and it's like, no thanks, let's not do that again. Right. So we may shy away from relationships or kind of just shut down in that way, or just not be open to new relationships or trying to rebuild relationships. You're going to see it probably in ways you don't expect. I would say like those are probably things that feel sort of obvious, right? But trauma can manifest in lots of different ways. I will say my clients don't look like they have mental health challenges. Like it's not a look, right? They're very well educated. They're successful. They're high functioning in the world. They're running businesses. They're taking kids to and from soccer practice. Like they are doing all of the things that the outside world would be like, hey, I want to be like them. They have it together. But on the inside or internally or behind closed doors, they don't feel connected. They don't feel like they have good friendships. They feel alone or isolated. And so those are the things that I always tell clients, like, there is no look to this. There's no look to trauma because we're taught to keep it together. Right? So we keep going and we keep moving. But we're going to see lots of things, and most common are going to be those physical ailments just because of that, like, neurobiology piece to this, right? So headaches, stomach aches, joint pain, fibromyalgia is a diagnosis that, like, still the medical community is not sure why it happens, but we just know there's a lot of joint pain, aches, and things like that, inflammation in the body. And I've had several clients with that diagnosis, and it's related to their trauma. And then I'm not saying like this cures all things. I'm just saying your body is going to take a hit from these experiences. Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
And then that social piece for sure, right? Like maintaining and building relationships is going to be a whole lot harder when we experience betrayal traumas.
Yeah. And it's interesting you said that sometimes, well, the trust piece for sure. And then sometimes it comes up in ways that we don't expect. And I don't know if anyone listening can identify with this, but I will admit, especially the first year after my DNA surprise, I would look at other families and like if there was one kid that looked a little bit different, I'd be like, their parents are totally hiding something from them. Like, and it was like an intrusive thought, you know, because it's not like I want to walk around thinking about that, but it really did affect my trust and belief in parents, I think, just generally.
Right? Yeah. That is a great point, because I think that happens, or that those are the things that show up, right? Where, you know, we don't necessarily think twice about it sometimes. I struggled with infertility for many years, and seeing pregnant people would, you know, make me cringe inside. Right. And what I have at the time said, like, I'm being traumatized by this experience. No, I went right. But knowing what I know now and kind of looking back in all of these things for sure. Right. But again, those are those little things that will kind of seep in. You might see it play out within your own parent-child relationship with your own child.
Yeah.
Right. There might be maybe some distance that starts to happen without even you realizing what's going on. But because internally so much is going on, we might be putting up a little bit of a wall in this relationship. Not on purpose per se,
right?
But just because so much other stuff is happening in our systems and we're just trying to manage it. And then looking back in, you know, a few years, you're like, oh, didn't even realize that that's what I was doing. But I kind of think of those domains of like the physical domain, the spiritual domain, the mental, like how we think about ourselves domain, and that relational piece, right? Of where these kind of trauma symptoms are going to lie. And chances are we're going to see some in all of those areas at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. So I know that we will dive much deeper into this at your session, but I'm curious, how do people fix this? How do people work through this? And how do they rebuild trust after experiencing such a big betrayal?
Isn't that the $1 million question, right?
Give us the cure. Give us the cure, Venessa.
If only there was one thing.
This episode is brought to you by Indeed. When your computer breaks, you don't wait for it to magically start working again. You fix the problem. So why wait to hire the people your company desperately needs? Use Indeed sponsored jobs to hire top talent fast. And even better, you only pay for results. There's no need to wait. Speed up your hiring with a $75 sponsored job credit at Indeed.com/podcast. Terms and conditions apply.
So good, so good, so good.
New markdowns up to 70% off are at Nordstrom Rack stores now. Fresh kicks, spring tops, new dresses. There's always a score.
I mean, the denim section is unreal.
Why do I rack? All the dresses.
I always find something amazing.
Head to your Nordstrom Rack store to find can't-miss deals on all the spring things. Great brands, great prices. That's why you rack.
This is a question that I get asked a lot just because of the nature of my job, and every client who comes to see me wants to know what is the remedy. Really kind of funny. My nurse clients, I love them, but they're so used to having like a prescription, right?
Yeah,
of like, we do this, this, and this, and that does this. And so they are like, okay, so tell me what to do. And it's like, it's not that easy. So I think first off, acknowledge the hurt. I think sometimes, depending on the experience and depending on our resources and like what supports we have in place, we will just try to suck it down and move on. Whether it's our family culture or society that tells us like, pick yourself up by your bootstraps, keep on moving, right? There isn't time for this, like whatever those things are, we just try to move on from it. And I will just tell you, no one has ever successfully, that I know of, run away from their trauma and been a whole, healthy human. It comes back. Even if you are capable of locking it away for a while, it will come out somehow. So just acknowledging that this happened, and it hurts, and I'm sad, or I'm angry. We've got to acknowledge that this trauma, this painful experience exists in the first place, and giving it that space. So that would be, if there was a step-by-step thing, I would say that would be the thing, is like, give yourself that room to just feel into that. Therapy is a great tool. I mean, it is what I do and all. But if you can find that support, right? And so therapy isn't the only way, but support groups, right? Your podcast, like things that are out here that can help build that community piece with other people who have experienced this, right? The worst thing I feel like in trauma in general is then feeling like you're the only person who knows what this is like.
Yes.
Or you're the only person going through something like this. And one, that's simply not true. But two, that just creates more pain when we feel like we're the only ones. And so as hard as it might be, reaching out for that support in spaces that feel safe, but that are also going to provide other people who are going to get it. Maybe not the same exact thing, but that when you walk into that space or get online in that space, you're going to be hearing from people who are like, yeah, okay, they're going to know some of these things that I'm going through. So it's important to have those people in your life as much as possible. For some of those like somatic things that we talked about that end up kind of getting stored in the body, there's lots of great tools out there now, because trauma is the buzzword. It also means that there's lots of information about it, right? And that we're learning about somatic exercises and polyvagal exercises and things that can really help our nervous systems sort of reset. And so I would encourage people it could be simple stretching, yoga. I hated yoga for the longest time. I mean, it was just like, I've got like my grocery list running through my head, like all of these different things. But I had one amazing yoga teacher who just would say, can you just lean into that 5% more, 10% more? And it wasn't an all or nothing practice. And so finding that way to help release some of this from your body, even if it's just 10%, can we just like turn the valve and release the pressure a tiny bit? So whether it's exercise or nutrition or like combining lots of different things, cold plunging is a thing, right? Always check with your medical provider before doing any of those things, but lots of things can have benefits to the physical body that experiences the trauma. And so again, this isn't a one size fits all approach to the fixing. And actually, I would encourage you to not say that you need to be fixed, because words matter to the brain. Right?
Yeah.
I have a client who's a mechanic, and he would often want to say that word. And I was like, we don't fix people. We fix things.
Yeah.
Right?
That's such a good point. And language is so powerful.
Yes. So powerful. And that negative cognition piece, right? That's part of the trauma. So if I'm broken, it's just going to reinforce a lot of these other things. But if I have a wound that needs to be healed, that just hits differently. Right? And there's a different level of hope that comes from healing versus needing to be fixed.
Yes.
Right?
I love that.
Yeah.
I love that. Yeah, I always try to say that I'm not trying to get over my DNA surprise. I'm trying to integrate it because it's something that happened and I can't undo it.
It's not going to ever go away, right?
No,
it's not going to be different.
No. Right.
And it's just going to be something that you have to, like you said, integrate into the life. And what does that look like here in this space?
Yeah.
Right?
Oh, thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, it's so important.
And, I was excited about your session from the first time that we spoke. But now I'm even more excited after this conversation. So kind of at a high level, can you share some of the things that you're going to go into with attendees at the retreat?
Oh, I have been thinking about this so much because I really do feel like it could be a whole weekend sort of workshop because there's so many components to trauma and then the betrayal kind of trauma that we're going to be talking about. But just like what we've talked about today, it's going to be a deeper dive into some of these areas and what we can do. And I really look at trauma and my clients' experiences through the lens of IFS, which is internal family systems. Another, phrase that is kind of popping up is parts work, right? Parts of self. We'll talk more about that and how that shows up because again, depending on when you found out about your betrayal experience, you might have been 15 and uncovering it for the first time, or you may have been 8, right? And so developmentally, there's going to be different things that you experienced, and those parts of you might need different things to heal. And so we'll kind of go through some of that developmental piece as well. But we're going to talk a lot about what we're talking here of like giving ourselves space and permission to grieve. Is not the most fun thing we want to do. My client's least favorite thing to do in the office is like pull out the grief work, right? But it is the most beautiful work we will do if we give ourselves the space and the permission to do so. And it's not because we feel the pain. That's not the fun part. It's what we get to learn, not just about ourselves, but about this experience and maybe the people around us as a result, right? So we're going to take in a deep dive. We're going to go through a lot of these different things, some of the buzzy sort of words that we're hearing a lot about in the trauma world. What does it mean to be, a trauma-focused like lens and see these things through, or polyvagal and all sorts of things. And they're all important things, but a lot of people just hear about it and don't really know what to do with all of this information. So like why cold plunging is a helpful thing, right? Versus like yoga. And they do different things, but they're both helpful. So we'll do a lot of that stuff, and then we'll do some parts work. And what I'm really excited about is hopefully giving everyone the opportunity to write the part of them who experienced their DNA surprise a love letter from the self. It's a practice that Elizabeth Gilbert, who's an author, does. And I'm excited to share it with all of them because it really is such a cool thing to see sort of that shift, right? And wherever we are, and they may write another letter in a year from now and even gain more sort of perspective. And so just giving them the tool to be able to do that for themselves is something that I'm super excited to see happen in that space.
I'm so excited. And your session fits so beautifully into that first day that we have planned, because the first session will be with Megan Irwin, who's a fellow therapist, and she's going to do kind of a deep dive into that IFS parts work, all of that. So then people will be able to take that knowledge going into your session. And then after your session, we're going to have some gentle movement, which will tie in so beautifully to some of these things that you're talking about. It just feels so, it's almost like we planned it. Right. But it feels so
come together.
It just is coming together so beautifully.
Yes.
I'm just so excited and really appreciate you taking the time to talk about this with me today, and then also to put together such a beautiful presentation for September. And I can't wait for people to experience it. If people are in Arizona or wherever you are licensed, would like to work with you or learn more or follow you on social media, where can they find you?
Yeah, so I am only licensed in Arizona. So if you are here and are sort of in the surrounding area, so my office is physically in Gilbert. I see clients throughout the state, though. I have clients in Flagstaff and Tucson, like all sorts of places. On Instagram, you can follow me at the EMDR Social Worker. So that's me there. They do have a website, and it's www.ignitehopellc.com. And so my practice is Ignite Hope Counseling. And so you can find lots of information there about me and my practice. You can look me up on Psychology Today by my name, Venessa de la Cruz, spelled with an E. Just, my mom had to go there, make it a little bit different. So everyone usually gets it wrong, but that's okay. But that's how you'll see it show up there. So you can follow or find me there. But yeah, I've got some space for some new clients right now. I'm also launching some intensives with clients, which is a good way for people who don't live so close to still get the in-person therapy model. We just do it for a chunk of time. So like 3 to 4 hours, sometimes a couple of days in a row, just kind of depending on the needs. But that's where you can find me.
Awesome. And I will link all of this in the show notes too for people who are interested in finding you. And your Instagram handle totally reminded me I need to have you back on to discuss EMDR because I'm constantly singing the praises of EMDR. It has been so instrumental in my healing, but we will leave that as a cliffhanger. Yes. Maybe I'll have you back on to talk about it.
We can talk about all of these things forever. So whenever you want me back, I will be happy to.
Awesome. Venessa, thank you so much for joining me today. I can't wait to see you in September. And if anyone is interested in attending the retreat and getting more of this information in person, you can sign up at DNASurpriseretreat.com. Thank you.